Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I am joined by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Sunny today and distinct sense of spring in the air. It's a bit early, but I'm sure we're going to have some cold, wet weather still, but all fine. Thank you. I hope you all are too.
Indeed, Johannesburg is finally looking a little bit up. The kind of gripping, freezing, merciless cold has broken, at least for now. But I'm sure it's not over yet. And we're joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you?
How's it, guys? Yeah, I think we've broken the back of winter, I think.
That's everyone says that, and there's always like one or two more cold fronts at the end of August, and everyone loses their minds. Speaking of losing their minds, let's speak about this opinion piece by Adriaan Basson, the chief editor of News 24. And this is titled "One Step Closer to an ANC-DA Grand Coalition and Why It's Good News." So I'm just going to quote a bit from this thing. He says, quote, "A significant political moment took place at the University of the Western Cape campus last week. The governing ANC and the official opposition, the DA, moved closer towards the possibility of a grand coalition in 2024. This is possibly the single most significant political development of the year so far. ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula told the conference and coalitions, we are also keen to explore grand coalitions in order to ensure stability, service delivery, and local development." Mbalula later confirmed to News 24 that he was referring specifically to the DA there. Mbalula said that the idea was currently limited to local government, but Basson speculates that that doesn't mean that it will stay limited to local government. He then goes on to say, Basson, the actions of rogue political entrepreneurs have forced the ANC and DA, representing about 80% of the South African electorate, to consider cooperation. But, and this is a big but, nobody in the DA who has access to the internet and a calculator can be bullish on the fact that a pact with the IFP, Action SA, and Freedom Front Plus and a few small parties will get them to 50% of the vote next year. Realistically, if the DA wants, he says that the ANC will probably still be the largest party in the country after the 2024 polls, and a grand coalition is exceedingly more attractive and stable option than opening the doors of the union buildings to the EFF and a few opportunistic political entrepreneurs, says Basson. So I have a number of problems with this thing, and I think I'll start off with Marius as to whether he agrees with me or not. But one of the things that kind of annoys me about this is it's got there's obvious evidence of direct communication with Mbalula about his thoughts on this and on the ANC's position on a grand coalition with the DA. Now, I think that's also overstated because I think there's different factions in the ANC and they clearly haven't made up their mind on whether they want to be in coalition with the DA or the EFF. But he then says, the DA says they don't want to be in a coalition with the ANC. But, that's what they have to say. It's kind of like, well, I mean, I don't know. Is there any serious push inside the DA for a coalition with the ANC? I don't think there is. Some people argue that there is. I don't think there's much evidence of that. And the real problem with this whole idea, the argument here is basically that this is the least worst option, that having some sort of shaky multi-party coalition may not even be possible, and even if it is possible, be really unstable, or the alternative being the ANC and EFF together. I'm not really sure how an ANC-DA coalition fixes any of the problems that we have in South Africa. Marius, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I agree. I see no upside for the DA going into coalition with the ANC. The ANC won't really need the DA actually to have a coalition. If the ANC goes under 50% next year, I've said it before, it'll only be a couple of percentage points, I think. They could get to one of the smaller parties. But the DA wouldn't be able to push through any of its kind of policy proposals. There's no ways the ANC is going to say, okay, let's scrap BE, let's change the labor laws, let's devolve more power to the provinces, all this, let's, we're not going to do NHI or any of this stuff. The DA is not going to be able to put through any of its policy proposals. It's going to be kind of a neutered organization in this coalition, and in nearly it's kind of an iron law in politics. The smaller party in a coalition is normally the one that comes out at the end looking worse. If you look at the National Party and the ANC and the Government of National Unity in the mid-90s, that really was a mistake of for the Nats to go into the coalition with the ANC. It really neutered the party, and we saw what happened. I mean, a couple of years later, it didn't even exist anymore. In the UK, there's another example, the Lib Dems and the Tories. The Lib Dems went into a coalition with the Tories, and they had to renege on a lot of their kind of campaign promises. There was one about university fees, which the Lib Dems had said they will, they're going to hold the line. They're not going to let university fees get increased. And they did pretty well in that 2010 election in university towns and so on. But being part of this coalition, they had to push, they had to let go of that campaign promise. And then the party in the next election, 2015, did very badly, while the Tories saw an increase. Then they actually won a majority in the 2015 election after having needed a coalition with the Lib Dems in 2010. And the Lib Dems, I think 2010 was their best election ever. I think they won 57 seats. 2015, they got almost wiped out, and then they went down to about 8 seats, and they still haven't really recovered from that. So, yeah, as I say, there's no real upside, I don't think. The DA is not going to be able to push through any of its policy proposals. I think a lot of people who support the DA won't be happy with them going into coalition with the ANC, and it'll really just be a coalition in name. I doubt the DA is going to be able to, as I say, move the needle on anything in South Africa. And as I say, I think the ANC will probably be able to, I don't see the ANC falling down to as low as 40%. Lowest I see as it stands now, the ANC is probably going to get about 45%. So they'll probably need a handful of small parties to push them over 50%. So I'm also quite skeptical of an ANC-EFF coalition even. We've seen now that ANC and EFF aren't really getting on that well in Gauteng anymore. A lot of senior people in the ANC, including Mbalula, who apparently was pretty keen on an ANC-EFF coalition a couple of months ago, has come out against it. So, yeah, I think this is all pretty moot. And, if there is a coalition next year, it's going to be the ANC and a couple of small parties, I think. The DA and the EFF. And I think, as I say, I think it would be a mistake for the DA to go into coalition with the ANC anyway.
So, yeah, I think that's pretty much probably correct. I mean, you could even see a party like, and they're not tending that way right now, but you could maybe see a party like the IFP if it was able to be essentially one of 2 or 3 coalition partners with the ANC, saying, if you give us basically free rein in KZN, then we'll go into national coalition government with you. But even then, I mean, yeah, I think that we even might be heading for a bit of a position now where there's a possibility that no one will be able to form a fully stable coalition. And I think a lot will depend on the kind of attitude and the election results. So if the ANC suffers a big setback, it'll be more difficult for any political party in the mix to form a coalition with them, because no one wants to tie themselves to a sinking ship. Michael, what do you make of this? I mean, I cannot think of a worse idea politically than this whole grand coalition thing. And it really seems to be something that I think some people inside the ANC are much more keen on than really anyone else is. I don't know. What do you make of this?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that might be the evidence of, or the reason why one should be skeptical and a little anxious, is a party that's been dominant for 30 years. It's rapidly losing its credibility. It's already lost its control over institutions, of its own government departments. It just can't do the job. In fact, in the past months, it's turned to its own bête noire. It doesn't like the private sector, but it's actually turned to the private sector to say, please help us. We literally can't do this on our own. These are all very candid admissions of the ruling party itself that it can't do the job. There is, on what grounds could one possibly suggest that working with that outfit would bring anything better? And I'm very much reminded here again of the 80s. This idea that people just couldn't pull themselves away from the idea that the Nats had to somehow be part of the dominant governance process of the country. Who else can do this job? That was the frequent question, and that's what we see increasingly today as well. We can't really do without the ANC. We've somehow got to work with them, and stability is actually, is not actually the objective we want to achieve at this point. We could actually do with a little bit more instability, actually, if it means getting over this very, very bad period of governance that we've now had. It's going to take, we can see here in the Western Cape at the moment, the taxi strike. It's not plain sailing. It's dangerous, but it calls for a resolve. It calls for principle. We've got to apply these things, and I think Marius is absolutely right. These are the kind of guiding principles that ought to define how the DA sees its future, and that thinking in terms of a coalition with a completely rotten outfit that's now, as you were saying a moment ago, it's a kind of dying beast. That's really not what you want to hitch your wagon to at all.
I think one of the problems here, and this may be an unfair criticism of Basson, but Marius would like your thoughts on this, is that policy is actually just not being taken seriously in these considerations. Try and find, maybe the DA under Mmusi Maimane might have found more common ground with the ANC. But in its current sort of political positioning, policy positioning, it's difficult to see how there could be any alignment. I mean, on almost every single policy of major initiative of the last 2 years, you mentioned things like NHI, things like BE, the DA is completely opposed to the ANC's plans. So how, this is like the radical free market party going into coalition with the Communist Party. It's not quite as extreme as that, but it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know. Do you think that policy differences are just being kind of brushed under the carpet here for, I'm not really sure what reason, to save the ANC? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I think so. And I think at local government level, you can ignore policy differences to a much greater level than at national, a greater extent than at national level. I mean, we saw that
it's more simple.
Exactly, it's more than it is more about service delivery. To use a silly phrase, but it's the coalface, of governance. Making sure people, that their rubbish is getting collected, that there's electricity, that they've got water and all that kind of thing. Then I think when you're at national level, it's a much, as I say, policy becomes much more important, and there's very little overlap between the ANC and the DA. I mean, the only way I could see this working is if the DA said, okay, we'll go into coalition with you, but we want finance, we want education, and we want Department of Public Enterprises, something like that. And that is our territory. You hands off, We'll support you in budgets, we'll support your candidate for president, all that kind of stuff, but we want these 3 or 4 departments. And like, as I say, important departments like finance and national treasury and so on. But that's something we will never, ever see happen. And if the DA doesn't have control, at least of some important departments, it's really just, as we're saying, it's keeping ship afloat. It's, it's kind of being the blood donor for somebody who's dying from some terrible disease. If they didn't have your blood, they'd be dead within a couple of minutes. So they're just for me, this doesn't make. I don't see any upside for the DA. And just another example, I mean, we saw the ANC and IFP also govern together in KwaZulu-Natal. And the IFPs, this was the early part of the century, and the IFPs only started to recover really now. So it was 20 years that it was damaged from governing with the ANC. So I mean, you'll know more people in the DA than I do, Nick, but tell them I think this is a bad idea.
Well, I certainly will if I get to talk to any of them. But yeah, I don't think this is realistically on the table right now. And I will just say that the sort of environment where no one is really strong enough to hold a stable majority in parliament, even if it's the ANC with a bunch of small parties, is actually an environment which may allow more reform than people think. Because it means that the sort of united opposition will occasionally be able to overvote the ANC. The moment you drop below 50% of the seats, all sorts of things become possible. You can have defections, you can have parliamentary politics playing out in interesting ways, and Parliament will once again become what it should have been from the beginning, which is one of the most important centers of our democracy. So I think that's a scenario that people often don't think about. We kind of have something like the status quo, but the ANC is not able to sort of just legislatively do what it likes. That actually already sometimes happens now. ANC MPs are pretty bad at attending Parliament. And so every now and again, they fail a vote because they can't get the quorum to actually fill the seats and things and pass a vote. So you can definitely see that kind of stuff, I think, happening more after an election that sees the ANC drop below 50%. But, that's still a long ways away. We don't even know if that's going to happen. So I think for now, let's move on to the next topic. And this is a report by Treasury into the free electricity program. So in South Africa, households which are very poor on the indigent list of municipalities are supposed to receive a certain allocation of free electricity from the government. So we're talking about basically the people in RDP houses and in shacks and that kind of thing, people with almost no income or no income at all. And they're supposed to get, I think, free 50 kilowatt hours of electricity. Now, there's enough money in the Treasury budget for about 10 million poor households to receive this benefit, which is quite a lot, right? That's a significant chunk of the population. And yet, in reality, the Treasury's analysis found that only about 2.3 million households get this. And most of this is due to the misallocation of funds and bad administration. Essentially, what happens is this money is given to municipalities by national government to say, you can help the poor, pay for the poor's electricity like this, and it's usually spent on operating costs, salaries, or other projects. Just kind of gets diverted. Even in areas where users are directly supplied by Eskom, households still have to apply to the municipality to be on their indigent list to receive this free electricity, and the municipalities just don't do a good job of this. So Eskom thinks that there's about 5 million households that it directly supplies who would qualify for this, but only 800,000 of them are actually receiving the stipend. And I think this is one of those things that's like a true indictment just of the state of governance, because this is a policy that the ANC should be able to tout as saying, look, here we are, we're providing for the poor, we're providing for the most desperate amongst us to access electricity, to get some of the basics of modern life. And yet, because of poor governance, so much is stolen, so much is broken that it just doesn't happen, even though the money is there. Michael, what do you make of this story?
I think the very first point to be made is if we wanted an illustration of the reason for our misgivings about a DA-ANC coalition, this is exactly what we're talking about. You're talking about actual daily practices in the institutional fabric of South African society that have got to be tackled, and they've got to be tackled with great vigor and with a sense of purpose and determination to get to the bottom of the problem and root out the bad elements. And is it likely that we are going to be able to do that in the smallest way if there are partners, if you have partners in your governance arrangement who will be resisting it, and I think this is a very good case in point. I did like when you said, Nicholas, that often this money is diverted to operational costs, and you used the phrase other projects. And the thing that immediately came to mind is quite irrationally in a way, but was that mayor in I think it was KZN somewhere who was so happy with his being appointed as mayor that he took his blue light brigade down to his
it was the municipal car, the mayor's car, that he had managed to wrest out of the hands of the IFP.
Yeah. So I think we would class that as an other project. But yeah, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? That there is a great initiative. You're going to help people who really can't afford electricity, who are really battling. As Marius often says, people who were jobless. It's not just a figure. This is a real household. It's a real person who can't put food on their table and so on. This is the kind of person this project is, or this initiative is aimed at. And then but the money just doesn't reach him or her because there are other people in the way who are venal or thieving or just inefficient. So yeah, it's actually, there's a tragic element to it. It's shocking. And the kind of thing we need to confront, but there is that tragic element as well.
Marius, what do you make of this story? I think this is one of those things that any new government would, even if it was quite ideologically divided, would be able to kind of make as a promise. And I'm surprised that things like this don't appear more in our election rhetoric. You'd think that this kind of issue would be dynamite for undermining ANC support.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, it's pretty much a dog bites man story. This kind of thing doesn't surprise anybody. And I think most people agree that, I don't mind paying tax and so on and municipal rates if it's going to actually helping people. I don't mind if X amount of municipal rates goes to people to pay for their electricity and so on. I really don't have a problem with it. I have a problem when this money gets taken and stolen and, spent on going to celebrate a mayor getting elected in, use the municipal car for stuff that isn't to do with municipal work and so on. So yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, this is one of the core things any new government's going to have to deal with, I think. And I think, as I say, most people, I don't think, have a problem with indigent households getting X amount of free electricity or free water. We all know the history of this country, and I think it's fine to help people who are struggling. But what it comes down to, poor people need to be helped, people who are living in bad conditions and so on. But the only way that sustainably people can escape those kind of conditions is work. And if we're sitting with 30 or 40% unemployment, people like that, they kind of, unfortunately, they face a lifetime penury with no real hope of escaping, which is the real tragedy, I think. I mean, just as Michael said there, I mean, we can look at these numbers, 35% of people unemployed, but each of those people is somebody who's now have the indignity of not working, the stress of not having money, not being able to pay for your family's food, or you don't know if you're going to be able to pay your rent and all that kind of thing. And that's millions of South Africans across this country, and that is one of the greatest tragedies, I think, in post-apartheid South Africa, is so much human capital has been destroyed.
Exactly right. Michael, any final thoughts on this before we move on?
I mean, I think that a piece of research or recurring research that I'm very fond of using every now and then in writing and on is the CRA's Quality of Life Index, which I think they began. That's CRA is the Centre for Risk Analysis, our research arm, if you like, which I think they began in 2017, and it measures the kind of performance over a basket of 10 issues, 10 very basic things: income, access to services, level of education, whether you have a bonded house, and so on. But essentially, a basket of 10 things that defines your quality of life. And what routinely, year after year, what that index shows is exactly as Marius says, all the things that have yet to be improved, yet to be transformed, that people are still waiting, people are still suffering. And it's unfortunately, it tends to be the same people who were suffering 30 years ago. And that until we confront that and deal with that, this is going to be the great unmet challenge of modern South Africa.
Indeed. All right, so let's move abroad for a bit to talk about interesting developments in the world's largest democracy, that being India, where a while ago the leader of the largest opposition party, the Indian National Congress, and it is no coincidence that that's similar to the ANC. They were kind of modeled after each other. Rahul Gandhi was kicked out of parliament because he had said that during a speech he had asked why, quote, all thieves have Modi as their common surname, which is playing off of, I think, a trope in Indian society that Modi is like the stereotypical name of a thief or something like that. Anyway, he was found guilty of defamation and sentenced to 2 years in prison. And Indian law says if you have been sentenced to 2 years in prison, you cannot be a member of parliament. He has taken this up through the legal system. I think he lost a couple of court battles, but it went to the Indian Supreme Court, and they have stayed it for now. I think it's still going through some legal turmoil. Not 100% sure of the details, but essentially he has been restored to parliament. And I think this is very important because there's been a lot of worry recently in India that Narendra Modi's BJP government has been, shall we say, moving the country away from some of its more democratic institutions, that it's been cracking down on freedom of the press, that it's been chucking out NGOs, that it's been just generally kind of moving the country towards one that's less free, and there's less room for independent thought. Now, this is all very important because India is facing a national general election next year. It's going to be a big year. It's going to be, I think, the US, South Africa, and India all going
UK, maybe.
national election, and maybe even the UK, all at the same time. So it's going to be a very political year. And seeing the strength of the BJP and its allies who are formed together in an alliance in parliament called the National Democratic Alliance, NDA, essentially all the other political parties in India have formed together a coalition called the Indian National Development Inclusive Alliance, which is the India Alliance. And despite this, they still look like they're maybe not going to do that well in the next election. And Narendra Modi, I believe, remains the most popular leader of any democratic country in the world in terms of approval ratings. Marius, what do you make of all this?
I think this is a pretty good sign for Indian democracy. As you said, there have been some pretty worrying signs there. There have been crackdowns, as you say, on NGOs, on the free press. I think India is actually, according to the organization Reporters Without Borders, India does pretty poorly on it, especially, I mean, South Africa does pretty well on it. I think we've got the 25th or 30th most free press in the world. India's in the hundreds, like 120 or something. So it's quite concerning. There's also some rhetoric that comes out of the BJP against religious minorities, especially Muslim people. Some has been quite worrying. Some senior figures in the BJP have said pretty bad things about Muslims. I mean, if we think kill the Boer is bad, yeah, some of the stuff that the BJP senior people there say about Muslims is pretty bad. And we've seen some anti-Muslim pogroms in places like Delhi, especially. But yeah, but this is pretty heartening. And India is a very important country. You know, it's the biggest population in the world at the moment. And compared to China, a lot of people talk about the Chinese century. I've said it before. I think it's more likely to be the Indian century. Also, India's a free market. As the free market, it's got much more of a tradition of democracy and secularism. Obviously, more of a tradition of democracy than China. And also, when you look at things like its population growth, China's got problems with the aging population, whereas India's population pyramid is more what you expect from a kind of developing country. Far more younger people than older people. So yeah, and it's been growing rapidly, I think, since the early 1990s when they got rid of the license raj. India on average has been growing about 5% a year in terms of the economy. And if you think about how many people there are, that's, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but that's probably adding an economy the size of South Africa each year to India. You know, so it's, and the number of people that are getting lifted out of poverty is amazing. Of course, far too many people still live in poverty in India. But at one stage, there were more people living in poverty in India than the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. That's changed now in the last couple of years, and that trend is carrying on with India. People are, moving out of poverty and into the middle class all the time. So it's definitely a place to watch, and that's going to be a very interesting election next year. From what it looks like, the BJP is probably still going to win, but there's new alliance. I mean, it's kind of the Indian moonshot pact that the Indian National Congress, a couple of other parties have put together. So it's also something to watch, and yeah, I mean. If I had to choose a country to dominate the 21st century, I'd much rather have it be India than China.
No, I agree with you on that one. There's actually a sort of strange kind of irony to all of this, which is that Indira Gandhi, who is a relative of Rahul Gandhi in the INC, and she was the leader of the INC, is probably the Indian politician who most brought the country in the 70s and 80s, in the 70s to the brink of becoming essentially a one-party state, an autocracy. And it was due to massive civil resistance in India, led in part by the BJP. And in fact, that's when Narendra Modi gets his political start, is running secret messages and printing pamphlets that are banned by the central government to kind of resist the state of emergency that Indira Gandhi imposed. And now we kind of see sort of almost like the roles have been reversed. And now Modi is the one, the all-powerful sort of central leader, huge popularity, who's threatening Rahul Gandhi's freedoms. I think there's something important in there, and I'd like to think that the people involved here perhaps could reflect on that maybe this whole trying to ban your opponents thing or seeing opponents chucked out of parliament is, I mean, to be fair, it was a court that did this, but Indian courts are famous for not, the legal system is not got a great reputation, shall we say, of being free from political interference. What do you make of this, Michael?
I think, I mean, excellent points that you've both raised. You remind me a story relating specifically to Indira Gandhi, her states of emergency in the 70s. As you say, she perceived that the national interest was under threat, and that the freedoms to oppose the government were not good for India. So she trod on them. And it was a very outspoken editor of the India's Statesman newspaper, The Statesman, the biggest English language paper in India, a fellow called Kushrai Irani, who ran up against her constantly over her state's emergency and her opposition to criticism and so on. And he had warned her at one point there are no freedoms so dangerous as those that are not exercised. And I think this is really the lesson that we see. But yeah, I mean, how extraordinary, as both of you bring out, the figures and facts that Marius has mentioned here. People so often forget that India is the world's biggest democracy. They often tend to think it's America, but of course India is much more numerous. And then also the fact of India having overtaken China as the biggest country. So I'm absolutely with Marius. It's a very fascinating country, big country, powerful country, lots of amazing ideas. They've just launched a moon project. So on all kinds of levels, but very various culturally and politically. I would imagine quite a maddening place to try to govern, but nevertheless enormously rich, great deep history, amazing culture and so on. So yeah.
It's always shocked me, I think, how few people have kind of taken India seriously. You get things like, until quite recently, the UK, I think, was still giving some development aid to India. And this coincided with the launch of their first lunar orbiting satellite.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a mismatch here somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Marius, anything very briefly just to close up for today?
Yeah, just 2 points. Depending how you measure it now, the IPL, Indian Premier League, India's T20 Cricket League, is depending how you measure it, the second richest sports league in the world. Richer than the English Premier League. The only one that's bigger than it is the American Football League, the NFL. And just on the 1 point, I think there's one lesson for South Africa. After the emergency, a coalition of parties came together. They managed to vote Congress out. These parties governed, but I think only for 2 or 3 years. And the coalition fell apart.
And then Adriaan Gandhi came back.
Exactly, because there was so much squabbling. There were people from all across the political spectrum, the religious spectrum. And the only aim was to get rid of Indira Gandhi and Congress, which they did. But there's nothing to hold these parties together afterwards. And then Congress came back, I think, 3 years later. And they voted out a couple of times. I mean, they dominated Indian politics till 2009 when BJP won their, I think it was 2014, till 2014 when the BJP won this outright majority now. But they've always been in and out of government. And you can never, rule them out, same as with the ANC, I think, unfortunately.
Definitely. It is also worth remembering, however, that unlike South Africa, India, despite all of its many problems, in the financial year 2021 to 2022, it got 9.1% growth. The next year, 7.2% growth, and it's looking like the next growth cycle might be 6.3% economic growth.
Astonishing.
I think once you get to about 5 or 6% economic growth, every 10 years your economy doubles. Amazing. So that's the direction, that's the place we should be in. And there's a lot of things we do better than India, but there's certainly some things we could copy from them. But anyway, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.